Fantastic.
Can I start sharing the screen?
I'll just do the introduction and then you can go again.
Yeah.
So, hello everyone, and welcome to this session of the BNU ZH International Philosophy Seminar Series. It is my great pleasure today to introduce our speaker, Melina Tsapos, who has recently been conferred her PhD in philosophy for a PhD dissertation, Dimensions of Conspiracy, and is the author of numerous papers, some of which I can admit to being a reviewer on, and because Melina knows, and others I should pretend I know nothing about with the reviewing process. So papers like Who is a Conspiracy Theorist? Should we worry about conspiracy theorists rejecting experts? Betting on conspiracy. This is a decision theoretic account of the rationality of conspiracy theory belief, plus a few more papers which actually came out at the end of this year. So Melina is very deep in the work on the philosophy of conspiracy theory, and today she'll be giving a talk, Building Resilient Epistemic Communities, which is going to be about conspiracy theory belief to some extent, and we'll be getting a reply by Lucian Baunmgartner from the University of Zurich, who will be replying after Melina has given her. Oh, I should point out, Melina got her PhD through the University of Lund, and I believe is still attached to the University of Lund, so is representing Sweden and Lund at the same time, even though Melina is actually an Australian Swede or a Swedish Australian, depending on which way you want to balance that particular calculus. I was
Thank
also
you.
going to point out that Melina and I have actually met several times in some very exotic locales. We met in Pavia in Italy, Amsterdam in the Netherlands, and Hamilton in New Zealand. The last one is a joke for any New Zealanders or Australians who might be in the audience. Melina, your time starts now.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Wonderful introduction. And thank you so much for this invitation. Let me just share my slides. And let me put present to view. Let's see. And now you're seeing the right screen, right? The full picture. Perfect. All right. So wait, let me go to the first page. There we go. So yes, I just changed the title last minute because I think that's actually what I'm more talking about, how we can build resilient epistemic communities. But as you will see, it is pretty much attached also to conspiracy theories and why we would believe them or don't believe them. All right, so let me just start by talking about an everyday fact that I think most of us agree with, that what we believe, we don't know firsthand, right? So, for example, I believe that China exists. I have never been there, though. I believe that the Earth orbits the sun, and that I believe that octopuses have 3 hearts. Yet I haven't personally verified any of these things, right? But what makes belief in them rational is that my trust in the testimony or in the either in expertise or in others who have told me about these things. And it might have also been some support or help from Google search. But in any case, that this idea that we base what we know on others' knowledge is the heart of social epistemology and where it starts. So it claims that knowledge is not an individual achievement, but a collective one. And so we depend on teachers, on scientists, journalists, and peers, and so on, to expand our epistemic reach. And in this sense, to be rational then, to be a rational knower, is not about finding out by yourself everything in the world, but to stand within an epistemic network, to be embedded in an epistemic community. And it has been claimed that, entertaining unwarranted or bad conspiracy theories is often problematic for good epistemic communities that we want to be in. So this is the problem that I want to be talking about, that we hear this. And in this talk, I will be arguing that some philosophers have tried to protect us from such bad and unwarranted conspiracy theories, that they've argued that they are bad because there's a deference to experts that is missed when we believe conspiracy theories or epistemic authorities. So I will use that interchangeably. But it actually creates a new, I will argue that it creates a new epistemic danger for us, namely the danger of perhaps finding ourselves in echo chambers. So how this talk will move Sorry, yeah, you guys can see this view, right? Okay, perfect. Nice. So this talk, how it's structured, just very basically, I will start off by just talking about how philosophers have drawn the line between unwarranted and warranted conspiracy theories by urging deference to experts. And then I will claim that this approach has led to what I will call the epistemic deference dilemma. And when I will present two possible solutions to this dilemma and how then we can move on to a more social conception of inquiry, which might help us to escape it fully. That's what I will be arguing. Okay, so let's start with an example to consider before I talk about the official story versus conspiracy theories, this distinction. So if we consider an example of, for example, let's say I'm a layperson, and I believe that climate scientists are fabricating data for political control, while on the other hand, you have spent decades studying climate systems and so on. It would then be, we would agree, I think, that it would be epistemically irresponsible for me to totally disregard your expertise and prefer my alternative view or my novice opinion on this matter. So I think that's an intuition that many philosophers have used to base what they think is the pejorative connotation, or the reason we have this pejorative connotation of conspiracy theories, because they contradict experts, with those that we ought to listen to. And we've seen this from philosophers like Brian Keeley, when he tried to make this distinction between warranted and unwarranted conspiracy theories. One of the first things he does mention is that they are contrary to the story. But then we have other philosophers like Cody and Patrick Brooks. They've also made this observation that conspiracy theories are often defined in opposition to an official story, although they have not necessarily drawn the same normative conclusions. But a philosopher, and I think I will be focusing on this particular philosopher, Neil Levy's account, where he takes this argument further. But there are others like Keith Harris and so on, but I won't be necessarily referencing those. But Neil Levy, what he does when he takes this idea further is that he grants that some conspiracy theories are real. There are real historical examples of conspiracies. But what he is arguing is that in general, it is irrational to reject explanations offered by by the properly constituted epistemic authorities. And don't worry too much. I will talk about what he means by this, the properly constituted epistemic authorities, because it might sound very big, but also very vague. Who are these really? I will get back to that. But for now, let's just accept that there are such epistemic authorities on conspiracy theories, that if we were to reject them or their explanations, then that would be irrational. And don't take just my word for it. There's just a little bit of a quote from Levy's paper in 2007, where he says that when we dismiss these are the ones that we call just conspiracy theories. So he says, simply knowing that a proffered explanation conflicts with the official story is enough for us rationally to reject the alternative. So reasonable believers then, sorry, just give me 1 second. Changed the wrong. Need to match my slides with my papers here. Okay, there we go. So yeah, this is what what he's arguing. And at first, of course, perhaps this might sound reasonable, like a reasonable safeguard against misinformation and these kinds of unwarranted conspiracy theories, bad conspiracy theories that we don't want. But notice really what's happening here. Levy isn't really judging the content of the alternative explanation, but he's judging the source, right? So it doesn't really matter whether the claim actually makes sense or if it even fits the evidence properly, but it matters whether it aligns with the official epistemic authorities or network. And so the idea that rational agents ought to accept the experts' consensus without further scrutiny, basically it's what he's asking us to do here, because that consensus is by definition where knowledge resides. And don't worry about consensus. And it's good if you've noticed that that's also problematic because we rarely have consensus in science. But let's just be a bit charitable to Levy here and pretend like we do have these kinds of consensuses sometimes. And yeah, just operate from that. So to understand his view then, or his account, that gets to accepting the official story and rejecting the alternative as irrational, in other words, these just conspiracy theories, we need to look at the deeper philosophical framework that supports it. So what Levy is relying on here is the social turn in epistemology. So traditionally, traditional epistemologists have imagined the knower as an isolated mind, as an individual who is kind of a Cartesian subject, forming beliefs independently, who's guided by just reasons and rationality and logic, perhaps, and so on. But they're doing this independently. But there was then a social turn that challenged, and eventually, I would say pretty much today, we would say that it's overturned this picture. There's a number of philosophers, but just to mention a few, Helen Longino, Schmidt, Alvin Goldman, and so on, and others, they have argued that knowledge is indeed social. And that we rely on external scaffolding, the idea from cognitive science that the extended mind, right, that we rely on notebooks, our phones, everything around us to build our knowledge about the world, so to speak, what we know. And also what philosophers have emphasized, testimony from others, right? Like the example that I mentioned in the beginning, that I've heard things, I've read things, and I still base my knowledge on that. I am, epistemically rational enough to do that. All right, so what they're saying is that knowledge then is a collective enterprise, above all. But Neil Levy, he argues that, there we go. What he's arguing is that he doesn't think that these social epistemologists have gone far enough. He says that social epistemology, as it is generally understood, remains individualist in the following sense. It assumes, or at least is fully compatible with, a picture of knowledge production in which cognitive processes takes place within the head of the individual agents. It is then transferred by means of testimony to other agents in the form of symbolic communication deciphered in the heads of these agents. The social, on this view, is the communicative link between individuals. But what he argues we need to accept is this one step further, that cognition itself is distributed. And we don't simply depend on others, he says, for information, but our very thinking is actually embedded in the social world and dependent on it. So drawing on social science, what he does is he especially emphasizes the phenomena of change blindness. And he claims that much of what we know isn't stored in our heads at all. He claims that this is what change blindness is ultimately showing. And he even says, at some point, that it is, he just takes the cognitive scientist's word for this experiment. And then he can just draw conclusions from that because he trusts them as epistemic authorities, which is a bit unfortunate because a lot of cognitive scientists wouldn't even draw that conclusion that he does so extremely. But anyway, that's a side point. But so this phenomenon, the change blindness phenomenon, what he says that is supposed to show is that we don't have this rich inner representations that's very intuitive for us to feel like or think that we have. So he says that it exposes individual cognitive limitations. And I think it's quite useful if we can just have a look at this, because I know not everybody might have seen this. I think maybe not everybody has seen this, an example of this, and it's easy to demonstrate it, what we talk about when we talk about change blindness. So I will just open this YouTube video and see if I can get it to work. Which one was it? I clicked on this one. And let me just also say, so there's just a simple task, and I just want you to follow along. And even if you've seen these kinds of examples before, just do it anyway, because there might be a surprise for you at the end that you might have not been aware of. So the only thing you have to do is to count how many times people in white t-shirts are throwing the basketball. But the person in the video will give you the instructions. Hang on. I'm just going to change my screen sharing as well to get the right one. There we go. Everybody can see my YouTube page? Or, yeah. Let me blow this up. There we go.
The monkey business.
You can see this now, right? Yeah, all right.
Lucian. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball.
The
Correct answer is 16 passes.
Did you get that right? Did anyone get that right? No? Okay, great. Okay, but let's see what's happening here.
Did you spot the gorilla?
Did you? Yeah, okay, both of you.
For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half missed the gorilla. If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it. But did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game?
Did anyone notice that?
Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold.
All right, that's changiness. Let me try to get out of this. Sorry, oh, here we go. Okay, we're back to the slide now. Great. Okay, so I think it's useful to just at least know what it's about, right? And as we saw, even if you catch the gorilla, you might miss other things. So the point of these kinds of experiments, what Levy is drawing on from these, what he's trying to say, is that that it exposes our limited cognition that we have for ourselves, because things can be changing or happening right in front of us, and still we miss them or we don't notice them. So he draws a very radical conclusion, actually, that knowledge production, that's not the radical part, but that knowledge production is distributed enterprise, and we need all kinds of things to have this coherent world that we're experiencing, and that feels intuitively like it's our cognition that's piecing together this whole world in such an organized fashion, and that we know so many things. So this part is actually quite a powerful insight, right? That comes from cognitive science and philosophy also. But what it does, it leads Levy to a rather striking conclusion. So his conclusion, here we can see the quote on the slide, where he says that reasonable believers ought to accept explanations offered by properly constituted epistemic authorities. Okay, we've already said that. But this is because, and here's the crux, if knowledge is distributed across a social network, then to reject the consensus of that network is to cut oneself off from knowledge itself. So in other words, he's saying that you don't even have access anymore if you think something else, then outside of this epistemic authorities' narratives, then you don't even have access to knowledge to be able to find out, right? And that's what he's saying. So you would be missing all these gorillas in the world, basically. Okay, and then if you step outside of this community of epistemic authorities, you lose your access to this shared cognitive resources, and you become isolated. This is basically what he's arguing. And this is why, on Levy's view, then, it's almost always rational to believe the official story, not because the authorities are infallible, but because the alternatives, the conspiracy theories that he talks about, or that he wants to, talk about, that are unwarranted, would sever you from the very system that produces knowledge. Okay, and so here's my concern with Levy's radically socialized knowledge, that he calls it, and why it's so radical. Well, I think that if we would follow it through, it would risk resembling echo chambers. So we would actually create epistemic environments that are echo chambers. And these are, what's the word? These are distinguished, maybe you could say that, by the characters, the characteristic that Nguyen talks about this a lot when he writes about echo chambers, where he says that dissident and alternative views are excluded and actively undermined on the basis of being outsiders. So that's the very reason that alternative views are being excluded from such echo chambers. And further, echo chambers, they undermine our capacity to know and to reason, not merely requiring epistemic trust. That's not, I mean, they do require that as well, but it's also to do a way in which it can easily be exploited, right? So it's not just who we trust and don't trust, but it exploits this trust, the echo chamber, if you're in one of those. And further, an echo chamber blocks the corrective function of disagreement and reasoning, isolating their members. And the way Nguyen describes these echo chambers is not just bubbles of shared opinion. They are actually self-sealing social structures that actively undermine the credibility of the outsiders. And at the same time, it also amplifies the voices within. So inside these echo chamber, disagreement is not seen as an opportunity for correction, but evidence of untrustworthiness. So paradoxically, the very mechanisms that sustain knowledge, that's supposed to sustain knowledge, like trust and deference and social validation, can become the mechanisms that erode it. That's what echo chambers show. And this is a quite cool website where you can plug in different parameters, and you can start off with social networks. It's online networks, so it's based on some type of social media networks where you can unfriend, and you can also change the parameter of if you have high tolerance or low tolerance to new messages that you don't agree with. And I've set, just to try out basically what Levi is promoting here, but I've set the tolerance to low and the unfriending to often. So if somebody in your network doesn't agree with you, you can unfriend them if they don't share your opinion, right? So you can just get that. And what we see is that really, really quickly, now I'm not doing it live for you here, this is just screenshots, but if you would go and do it, what you would see is these clustering or groups forming, these echo chambers where people have the same views form naturally. And yeah, it happens pretty fast. So with these echo chambers, I think that we encounter a problem for, or what I call the epistemic deference dilemma. It's really a dilemma. So on the one side, we have the imperative to trust experts, right? Without that trust, we would fall into epistemic isolation as it was and undermine access to knowledge, right? This is what Levi, for example, is arguing. But on the other hand, if we reject autonomous belief and alternative explanations, we risk also becoming echo chamber or echo chamber-like environments. And with this restricted access to alternative perspectives, we have undermined access to knowledge. Okay, and just then I generate image. I think I need to buy a paid subscription for it so I can get better pictures, but at least you can see this person who is at this crossroad. Sorry, I know I've mixed my papers again. No, I haven't. Okay, so Levi's model of social knowledge, though I think it is well-intentioned, I think it has a real risk of facing this outcome. So by equating epistemic responsibility with accepting unquestionably the official story from the epistemic authorities, it threatens to reproduce precisely this epistemic pathologies that would so that we're often associating actually with unwarranted conspiracy theories, isolation, distrust, dismissing dissenting voices, and so on. And interestingly enough, it's precisely what Nguyen is arguing when he talks about echo chambers. So he talks about the problem with conspiracy theories is when we find them in these echo chambers, because they have no outside voices that would correct them. Let's say if they think that the Earth is flat and NASA is conspiring to hide the true story about the Earth from us, then these form echo chambers, don't escape from it, so they never learn that the Earth is really not flat, so to speak. So this is exactly interesting that we find the same problem then with other accounts, that when we would exclude or reject alternative explanations. So just before I continue, because I promised 2 solutions, right, to the dilemma, just let me see how I'm going for time. So I promised 2 solutions, but before that, I just quickly want to step back and just reflect a bit on where we are at this point. So why do we have this tension between so why do we oscillate between this blind faith that I talked about in experts, somehow just expecting that, and a radical distrust, which often in social media and so on, conspiracy theories are usually seen as the ones that are radical in this way. So why do we have this tension, and why does it persist? I think one part is that it's psychological. Humans are social learners. We have evolved to share information and to calibrate our trust based on group membership. And when trust is rewarded, it reinforces cohesion. But when it's betrayed, we can see skepticism spreading like wildfire. But the other part, and perhaps the more important part for us, is the philosophical one. So I just think simply that we lack a good account of what it means to be autonomous and interdependent powers, to be able to have good epistemic communities, right? I think this is lacking. And I'm not pretending in any way that I will be able to solve this and give us this account in this talk, but I want to focus on this problem, right? And what we need to get to get a better balanced view on this. So what we have learned from social epistemology is that knowledge is distributed, right? But how do we balance this then? And in this example that we're using now with Levy's view and so on, or for the dilemma that I've put up, I think there's 2 solutions. So I will be arguing that Levy's account is not social enough. We need to make it more social in a way. And then second, I will ask us to, I think that one of the problems can be solved, or the problem will actually dissolve, if we re-examine the kind of epistemic structures we expect from experts or epistemic authorities. And I think asking whether the scientific model of authority that Levy is suggesting even applies to the domain of conspiracy theories. And this has been questioned in other ways. I think M has also a very good paper on this. I've questioned this in another paper, but I will try to have a novel or new way of looking at this question in my solution. All right, so let's start with the first one then, where I argue that actually, if we really consider it, Levy's account is not social enough. We need to make it more social. So let's return to claim, just to refresh our memories. His claim is that to actually be rejecting the epistemic authorities will cut us off from knowledge itself, because knowledge is distributed. All right. And knowledge is a network where you either belong or you don't belong in it, on Levy's view. And if the explanation is challenging the experts, or as he calls it, the official story, that's cutting oneself off from knowledge. This is what he imagines, right? But let me see if sorry, I need to change the slide here. Right, so what he's imagining with these epistemic authorities is that he says this, right? Like he talks about them as similar to scientific communities. And what they need to be doing is to make the results available, and available to scrutiny, he says, within and beyond the network. The direct quote where he says it is that epistemic authorities are properly constituted to the extent to which they consist in a distributed network of agents trained in assessing knowledge claims, who make their evidence and processes available to scrutiny within and beyond the networks. But how this is accommodated in Levy's account is unclear, at least to me, since the argumentation is that to contradict the expert, to present an alternative, right, is irrational and literally cuts one off from access to knowledge. So in other words, I think it would be rather pointless to make an account of epistemic authorities or from the epistemic authorities even available to scrutiny, because rejecting it would, by definition, be irrational anyway. So who should be making this scrutiny? Who should scrutinize it, right? To make sense of what Levy wants here is perhaps, I don't know, maybe he's imagining that it has to happen within the epistemic community themselves. So in that case, I want to suggest instead Helen Longino's account on scientific methods, where she says actually that the strength of a scientific community lies not in its unanimity, but in its diversity of criticism. So it needs to have this openness both within and across the boundaries of the scientific community itself. Building on Longino's idea here to make the criterion diversify the criticism and where it comes from, she insists that it would avoid dogmatism, epistemic communities can remain open, and we can then have this healthy knowledge production that we want from our communities. But so building on her idea, I argue that this is the issue. Let me see. Yeah. So this is the issue and our way out of Levy's account by making it more social. And how I do that is, again, I want to just return to cognitive science, where if we just consider human reasoning, how that actually has evolved, a very acclaimed or well-established view, it comes from Hugo Mercier and Dan Sperber in their book, The Enigma of Reason, in which they argue that human reasoning is a socially evolved cognitive tool, which have evolved for social interaction and also through social interaction and argumentation. And the individual's reasoning abilities is really grounded in universal cognitive architecture that we have. So its proper use and development, they say, are social and communicative. Further, Mercier and they proposed what they called interactionist view that has this two complementary biases that they call it. So on the one hand, we're very good at production, or they call it production bias. So what we're good at is find support for our own, which is very useful to persuade others. But we also very good, they call evolutionary bias, at critically assessing arguments of others. So this is useful for filtering bad information. So this model makes disagreement not really a threat at all to knowledge, but really it seems like it's the very engine of knowledge. So it's precisely through critical interactions that epistemic communities are able to refine their beliefs. And so the reason is the loss of dialogue when disagreement is dismissed in advance. And that's exactly what echo chambers do. They erode the trust, not only trust itself, but the possibility to shared inquiry. Okay, so if we look again at what Levy says here, when he says that we're being cut off from knowledge, what does it mean when we're being cut off from knowledge? What does he really mean here? What does it mean that when he says that they're alternatives? So how does the alternative cut you off, basically? So I think that there's two options here to interpret Levy, maybe, if I'm charitable. But you could, or maybe it's not interpreting him really. Maybe it's just there could be two possibilities we would imagine this, right? And one possibility is just saying that the subject has simply excluded themselves from participating and doesn't engage with the experts. So consider, for example, an account from the Bible that Jesus was crucified, he died, and then he rose from the dead 3 days later. This account is really not an alternative because there's no, I mean, it's not alternative in the sense that there is another official account that it's an alternative to, but it's based on an account from the Bible, right? So there's no outside source outside of this faith-based source. So that's one sense, right? But then there's the other sense of alternative. When we consider, well, this is the B alternative, where S considers the alternative explanations, which is relative, or you could say maybe even in relation to an official story. So an example of this would be if NASA, the official account from the US government is that NASA has successfully landed men on the moon. But the alternative to this official account is that it was faked. And really what happened is that it was filmed in some, movie location or some studio in Hollywood. Okay, so that's alternative in another sense. And here I think it's fair to say that Levy's account is based on the alternative B, right? That's what he's talking about. So if someone is considering the official explanation, but comes to reject it, so they're actually considering it at first, but they come to reject it and prefer an alternative in the sense of the B alternative, they are disabling themselves and cutting themselves off from knowledge. Yeah, okay, so I'm just basically repeating again, sorry. But so this is what he's saying. He's saying that the worry is that dissenters cut themselves off from knowledge. But I think that that's actually a misunderstanding of the nature of social cognition, based again on Sparbar and Hugo Mercier and Dan Sparbar's account of how social cognition and this argumentative and perspective, this interactionist view of our cognitive architecture that has evolved to give us this type of reasoning to build knowledge on. So I think in this sense, he's actually misunderstood what it means to be cut off, because a person who is critically engaged with the expert's claims isn't isolated at all. Or at least I don't understand what he means by that. So how they can be, right? They are participating in a very social process that indeed produces knowledge through this process. All right, but at this point, perhaps you might be still objecting and a bit skeptical to this and suggest that, but I mean, really, if we allow every dissenting voice, don't we just open the floodgates, so to speak, for misinformation? And I mean, of course, this is a fair concern. It is. Public discourse today, I'm sure no one of us is immune to it. It's just saturated with falsehoods and bad faith actors that really poison the epistemic environment. So surely an exclusion then, maybe it's intuitive to reason that an exclusion is necessary to some extent. But even so, there's a very interesting account, some accounts or work on network epistemology, for example, this one from Moreau and Olsen. They try a lot of simulations on Bayesian learning in social networks, and they've suggested an even more nuanced picture of this. So what they're asking in their paper is that is whether an epistemic, if there is any epistemic benefit of exclusion, if that's larger than the cost, right? Would that justify the cost itself? And the result from their study is that under certain conditions, communities of open-minded agents can still converge on the truth, even in the presence of ranters. And what they mean by ranters, or how they define ranters, they are individuals who persistently spread falsehoods. So these ranters, they're systematic agents of misinformation. They do it deliberately in this network context. So that is, in other words, the open-minded agents in the network can still converge on truth. They've showed that. And they even show, like even in the presence of these ranters, and actually in some setups, they've shown that the presence of ranters helped making reputation or the trust mechanism that's operating more sharp, because the open-minded agents were more they were getting better at monitoring the reliability and other features as well. So the presence of these ranters, yes. Let me just, yes, bad information is a problem, but the cost of censorship, we can conclude, or even exclusion, is higher under this account. Okay, yeah, sorry. So this is, so if we were to exclude these voices, it backfire, right? That's the important part, because it deprives the network of valuable corrective information and increases vulnerability to coordinated error. All right. So with that out of the way, how high for time? Because I don't remember when we started.
2, so you've got at least 10 or 15 minutes.
All right. Okay. So I'll try to make this brief then. The second solution, right? If we move to the second one. So I was saying maybe we should rethink the structure. So yeah, so the first one solves the problem of making it more social by including other views as well. And so this solution is basically just rethinking the structure of epistemic. The question actually, we should question actually, even if we can have such epistemic authorities on conspiracy theories that Levy is suggesting. And like I hinted at, he assumes that these epistemic authority and conspiracy theories are modeled on scientific expertise. And actually, I mean, yeah, he somehow assumes that we have such experts already. But let's put that aside for now, that question, or for this talk. Actually, I won't get into that. But I just want to look at when he talks about having scientific experts in this way on conspiracy theories. Is it neatly transferable to conspiracy theories? And if it's not, when I actually think that then the dilemma has dissolved. We don't have the dilemma anymore. Now, there are several reasons why expertise on conspiracy theories may not follow the scientific method. It's not replicable. You know, I think it was Keeley, I'm not 100% sure, but who said that electrons, for example, or like these kind of natural phenomena, they don't actively hide from us or try to deceive us, right? So there could be many reasons, and M has a very good paper on this. I have one where I'm arguing for a similar thing, that we can't really have this kind of scientific method applied to the phenomena. But what I want to do here for now is just consider the social characteristics. So I'm just looking at the social characteristics of the scientific method, and if that model or that criteria for science production or knowledge production is something that is applicable for conspiracy theory knowledge. Okay, and so I'm considering here again Helen Longino's, but also Marjorie Green's accounts, where they talk about the 3 aspects of the social character of science. So how they see it is that there exists, the existence of the scientific discipline is a social enterprise, just the same as Levy did or does, and the individual members of which they are dependent on makes it such that, first of all, they require some condition, like some type of ideas that we build on. We need to have the help or the exchange of other instruments, for example, that has been built by others, etc., under this kind of scientific practice. And I think that actually this is not a criteria at all for being an expert on conspiracy theories. Let's take a whistleblower, right? They don't need any fancy instruments to be able to tell if there's a conspiracy going on or not, to be able to whistleblow. They don't, or let's consider the conspirator themselves, right? So I have a picture here of Elizabeth Holmes. I mean, she would probably be able to tell us, right, if she was conspiring or not. And so she would be very much an expert on conspiracy theories without having to be embedded in other conditions, other ideas, and so on in a scientific network. And then the second one that they say, the second criteria, is that scientific inquiry requires education. So this is quite normal that we know that you can't simply declare yourself to be a biologist, for example, but you have to learn the traditions, you have to learn the right kind of questions to ask, mathematics and observational techniques and so on. And this has to sort of be passed on, right? You have to be educated into this world, the scientific world, from others. But is this also the case for conspiracy theories? Again, I don't think so. I don't think you need this kind of education. I mean, I'm not excluding that you could learn some things by, recognizing so on, but I'm just saying I don't think it's necessary at all. So, for example, jury members who are expected to follow the law, right? That's true. They're expected to follow the law, but they are also tasked to individually determine whether a conspiracy has occurred in a case or not. Or the same thing again with whistleblowers and the conspirators themselves, just to give an example. And so finally, the third thing is that the practitioners of sciences together constitute a network of communities embedded in a society. So the sciences are among a society's activities, and it depends on their survival, on the society's valuing what they do. And this is the one that I would say, yes, maybe yes. Because to some degree, I think this is necessary for some people, if they would call themselves experts on conspiracy theories, that they are embedded in the society in this way. So one example, if you see these two pictures down on the right bottom, so we could have a case where a company is sitting together at a meeting and they're literally conspiring or talking about how they should have a secret advertising campaign against their competitors. But it's illegal, right? And it's something that really wouldn't raise any eyebrows. So if one of these people in this meeting would expose this secret from the company, in some countries, like I know my country, they would get reprimanded. So there's actually laws to protect companies from this kind of thing happening, right? So you won't be some kind of whistleblower, but we expect this kind of secrecy going on in this company. But then we have other cases where, for example, if you've heard about Dieselgate, where Volkswagen was involved with this big scandal where they were in secret faking their pollution data and so on. I'm not 100% familiar exactly with what was happening, but it was a huge scandal, right? So when they discovered this, it was an illegal and a bad activity. So it's legal, but even moral things. So in this sense, I think the expert has to be embedded in society to be an expert on conspiracy theories, just knowing what is a conspiracy or not. Okay, so what I think this shows that even if science provides an exemplar model of collaborative knowledge, its structure is not the right template for all epistemic contexts. In this case, demanding the same form of deference to experts on conspiracy theories risk importing a structure of authority that doesn't fit the phenomena. That's basically my point. So let me then just conclude. And and like I said, since we don't have that, and since it's not even necessary, I think that dissolves the dilemma for us. So in conclusion, what I've let me just try to all these threads together somehow. So I talked about these rejecting alternatives as or this idea that rejecting the alternative is problematic, right? And just accepting the epistemic authorities' accounts. And I think it's problematic because, well, first of all, it does risk placing us in echo chambers. It is unclear if we are, even unlikely, that we should expect experts on conspiracy theories to have the structure of epistemic authority that Levy is suggesting. And third, even if we consider Rand in that environment, we are still off epistemically to be in echo chambers. So what I hope, or what I think is the takeaway here, is that to move towards more resilient epistemic communities, a healthier epistemic model must be more social in a sense, where it's emphasizing the open dialogue, diverse of critique, rather than just this blind trust or total skepticism, which both are problematic. So thank you so much. Should I take off the,
That was great. Although now I feel I have to now commission a talk which is the exact opposite. So we have some nice alternative views in order to have the best kind of resilient epistemic community. Now,
I'm 100% open for that.
Lucian is about to do that right now, or Lucian might be about to be in your echo chamber. We're about to find out, because Lucian, you have the floor to give your response.
Very good. So is this intended to be like a back and forth, or am I just talking for 10 minutes?
So
I look at back and forth.
If you, I mean, you can do it either way, up to you.
Okay. Very. So I just have a clarificatory question to start with. That by restricting alternative voices, we can risk becoming echo chamber. And I just to understand, do you mean that like the consensus risks becoming an echo chamber, like the consensus view? Just that I understand correctly.
So just the idea is enough that we need to exclude any voice that isn't what we call the epistemic authorities. So if there is an epistemic authority and you're not even allowed to have an alternative explanation, because then by definition you're irrational, then that risk of becoming an echo chamber. If we because what is happening is he's suggesting that we cut it off, we cut ourselves off in that way, and I think that's wrong way of seeing the social nature of knowledge production.
Okay, but so in Levy's view, we would still have like an internal debate about things, and then like expert debates, and then afterwards there is a consensus is formed, right? So you still have some kind of deliberation and
Right.
alternatives being discussed, right?
Yes,
It's just
I think
that once a consensus is reached, people are excluded if they think otherwise.
Yeah, I think that's what he's arguing. Yes.
Okay, so just to briefly look at your two solutions to the dilemma. There I was wondering whether you have considered like how central it is to first establish kind of principles and procedures that are legitimate and valid for knowledge generation, right? And it seems that like in the scientific community, we have kind of established them. One of them is falsification, right? And I did not know whether this is part or prerequisite of number two of solution two, or whether this would be a second.
You mean to have these kinds of principles that we have for in science?
Exactly, yeah.
That would be necessary. That's the thing. Yeah, exactly. I think that's what I'm talking about. And I was speeding up a bit, sorry, towards the end. But I think that's the problem, that I don't think those are necessary for somebody knowing if a conspiracy occurred or not, like if a conspiracy theory is actually true or not. I think they could be useful in some ways. Like maybe you could have experts on conspiracy theories on some aspect of conspiracy theories. Like, for example, I don't know, historical conspiracy theories and things like that. Then yes, I think that would be an important feature. But I don't think maybe if we go really basic, like we have basic things like debating or arguing and stuff like that. That yes, but I think that's also principles that is outside of the academics tools, right? We do that. I think it's accessible for everybody to do that. So engaging in those kinds of things is necessary. Yeah.
So maybe this is a bit of a naive follow-up question, but like a lot of like conspiracy theories, like flat Earth theory, so on, do not revise their beliefs, or like conspiracy theories that hold those beliefs do not revise their beliefs when like confronted with conflicting data, right? So they kind of list falsification to a certain degree, or have like super high standards for falsifications that are unreasonably high, right? Now, like just like a naive question, should we allow dissenting voices if they aim like principles of knowledge generation as we let falsification? Should they be excluded?
That's a good. I mean, I think that is exactly what a lot of people are fearing and want something about, right? But I think this paper from Moreau and Olsen and some other papers as well really convinced me, at least, that in many cases we are better off with allowing that. Even like these ranters, you put the most extreme setting on ranters. You know it deliberately. They're spreading misinformation. Like that's why they're called ranters, because they just keep ranting about this. They don't care at all about updating their belief. And it's not only because they're rationally stubborn. We need some people that are resistant in the system to have good knowledge production, but they're actually actively doing it for other reasons than necessarily just themselves believing it. And so even those, if we allow those in the community, we are still better off, because the cost of exclusion and this kind of if you will, or what we're going to call it, is worse for the epistemic community. Yeah.
Okay. So maybe again up here, nowadays we have like big social media platforms with bots, for example, right? So, and bots kind of like with a high frequency share or spread misinformation. So it seems like one, I don't know, like newspaper articles made by experts or like an expert's opinion or something like this, kind of decision on that there is climate change or something like this, and then there are like, I don't know, 5 post like a post every 5 seconds saying the opposite. That there is kind of like material asymmetry between like experts that have a standing but not a lot of reach, and bots that can have an insane amount of reach without having any standing, an epistemic standing, right? So I was thinking whether material conditions might heavily influence the negotiations of like what ought to be believed after deliberation, right? So we allow, for example, dissenting voices, and the majority of those voices are bots, and influence the public in some way that they, example, or get to believe alternatives that are factually false if something like this exists, right? Then we have kind of a problem that stems just from the fact that bots can spread information much faster than humans.
Yeah, if those conditions are true, then yeah, I agree with you. It would be very big problem. But I think this is precisely what they're arguing, and I'm arguing too, that so we have this reasoning bias, right, where we are good at identifying, and what these systems showed is that the more these kind of problems occur, the more these random bots, if we should call them that, happened, then we became even better, or like humans become even better at identifying sources. So not necessarily, I think the problem is I don't think that this will happen, the picture that you paint, that people will believe these bots, but rather we will learn to identify them and disregard them if they don't make sense, right? If they're not reasonable, or and yeah, maybe there is a risk that some will, of course, believe them at first, but yeah, I don't think the quantity necessarily is a problem.
Just like from my own experience on social media, it seems that a lot of people subscribe to what bots say if it kind of supports their own view. And sometimes it doesn't even have to be a belief that they share, but it just has to be like anti-establishment, and that's kind of enough, right?
Okay. Yeah.
But
that's the thing. I don't think that's the same thing as making people bad believers or believing the bad thing. They just already have that view, and then somebody's supporting it, and so yeah, they.
But then how can you ever change their beliefs, right?
That's the thing. By reasoning, right? I think if we have echo, that's a really bad thing. So if you end up being in an echo chamber on social media and you have this problematic belief, yeah, I don't know, that climate change is fake, right? And then you're just friends with all these bots that are telling you exactly what you think. Of course, that's a big problem. But that's what I'm arguing, that is a problem as well, because it's echo chamber. So I'm not arguing that echo chambers are good, but that's why this kind of environments need more voices. So if this person who has this belief that climate change is fake, if they were actually going outside of their bubble, consulting other people who have different beliefs, I think it's more positive than being in this bubble with all the bots that just reconfirm what I'm already believing.
Okay. Maybe like a point that goes a bit in a different direction. So it seems that many communities nowadays are like highly fragmented and polarized, right? And some individuals might reject an official story just as a matter of habit. And it is kind of less about like the epistemic belief in an alternative, but rather just like contradicting the official voice, right? So saying, for example, the NASA moon landing was faked has in some cases become less about the epistemic status of the moon landing and more about like that it generally communicates an anti-mainstream and anti-establishment attitude, right? So people don't even believe that, but they just say it to spout against the government, right? So in a way, like certain beliefs or statements that can communicate conspiracy beliefs, for example, can come out as rational essentially because of non-epistemic grounds. Just for example, your own identity. They become like identitarian, like almost like dog whistles, right, to a certain degree. And I was wondering how your view would kind of deal with this kind of partisan and identitarian attitudes towards a whole knowledge network that is already established, right?
Do you want to just tell me a bit more? I think it's a good question. I'm just not really sure exactly what it means. So there are these people that are in the habit of just contradicting this thing that they don't trust, or
Exactly. So the main point is that they don't trust the thing, and every utterance that is kind of criticizing the thing or a statement about an alternative, not first instance or in a core instance about the belief itself, but rather just like a speech check against the government or the established knowledge network and so on.
Mm-hmm.
More a function of a speech act rather than a statement of belief, right?
Yeah. And so the question was about them, what was the question about how they function?
How your framework would kind of deal with this kind of entrenched, polarized way we have started to talk in society, right? Like common ground is eroding, and people cannot have discussions anymore because they're talking past each other, right? So they're spouting A and B without believing A and B just because A and B have a certain communicative effect.
Yeah. I think the problem why we've ended up here in the first place is precisely those bad epistemic practices, right? I think that's not a good practice. And I also think that some responsibility, of course, lies on I mean, now we're assuming that these are just totally not doing it for the right reasons. But I think in a lot of the real cases that we see on polarization in politics and so on, I think maybe we're all influenced of what's happening in America, but also in Europe. I think to some degree, some of it is a legitimate criticism, right? And that's why a lot of people are believing so-called more conspiracy theories or fake news and so on, because the trust has already been eroded. So something really, really important is trust in an epistemic network. And I think that is undermined if we want to re-emphasize that we exclude views we don't agree with. I think you build more trust by using these kinds of practices like reasoning and debating, and that's what builds trust more than by excluding these views. I think that's even more problematic. I mean, because then actually we risk ending up being in echo chambers. We've seen that in North Korea, for example, right? You want to exclude views that you think are bad, and when you take it to its limit, that's what's going to happen. You're not going to be able to access anything or read anything that's outside, and it's just going to keep reaffirming your view, no matter which side you're on, right? Like even if for us, we experience it as the right thing to believe right now, I don't think, even if we follow our own principles, I don't think we would end up living in the right epistemic environment that we want to be living in, excluding those views.
So do you see your account as kind of like a descriptive like theory, or has it a part of like a normative aspect, or
not really, because I don't really see it as that I've built a full framework here. I think I'm just using these arguments for this phenomena that are already well known, right? So echo chambers, for example, and like this view of the ranters, I'm just arguing for this being a better epistemic practice for a healthier epistemic environment. If it's normative, I mean, yeah, there is a normative aspect to it, that we shouldn't cut off dissenting voices. That's definitely a normative aspect, because I argue that both from the descriptive, which is, I think it's always hard to disentangle these two clearly, but from what we observe, right, from these networks that we can build and even try out what's going to happen online and so on, from these results we get, then I think we can draw the conclusion that it seems like we would be worse off if we implemented this idea that cutting off someone from knowledge is better. Or so it's kind of both, I think.
And maybe just like a last question that probably goes a bit too far, but like, so you have these two ways of solving the dilemma, right? And I wanted to like ask you whether, like, I don't know, like what practical steps one could take to like enforce like certain epistemic structures that we expect from experts or so on, how we can reestablish common ground in a fragmented society. Does your account say, can we make any inferences about these questions, or is it kind of separated from that?
Good question, and very difficult to answer because it's very complex and right. I don't think. I mean, I think what I emphasize, one thing that I do think is again this account of the interactionist view, because it is. I don't like. I can't. I don't think we can stress enough how important reasoning is, because it's the one thing that sure, it's totally social practice, but it's actually at this tension between our autonomous beliefs, the things that we can figure out for ourselves. I don't subscribe to this fully rational, fully social, radical social view, that we don't have any sort of cognitive abilities as individuals, because if we just look at, I don't know how familiar you are with like predictive processing frameworks of the mind, if we place ourselves in a world where we have nothing, we just by interacting with the world, we build up models of the world that we can interact with and learn from. So there is an individual aspect to this, but I don't want to undermine all the knowledge that we have that builds on social knowledge as well. So exactly this tension between using other people's knowledge in the right way to still maintain this ability that we have to reason, and in that interaction we build knowledge. So I think that's what we need to do, and that's what gives us more trust, because when somebody doesn't want to engage with that, we don't trust them. And I think this is exactly what's happening with people that we call bad conspiracy theorists. They don't want to engage in some cases. So in this kind of way, like you said, they don't update on the evidence, they don't really even care about it. Yeah, then that's actually wrong epistemic practice. But we shouldn't also be doing it that way, right? So if we have to kind of live what we preach, and since everything points towards that, we would still be better off allowing these spreads of misinformation and conspiracy theories, unwarranted ones, if we call them that, or like these ones that are practicing it in the wrong way, right? Let's say, as we would still be much better off in this open society, because in the end, we would still come to more true conclusions than if we were to cut them off or exclude them. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay. Some good questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucian. Thank you, Melina. So we're now going to move into the Q&A section, which we have around about 17 to 20 minutes if people want to ask questions. If you want to ask a question, you can either use the raise hand function on Zoom, or you can type your question into the chat and I'll read it out on your behalf. As the convener, I'm just going to use this as an excuse to make two minor points, one slight observation, and a kind of an attempt at an objection, even though actually I think I can undermine it with more recent work anyway. So the two minor points. One, there is some suggestive evidence that young people are better at spotting bots on social media than older people are. So part of the problem we might have for people believing bots on social media is that it might be a problem of digital literacy. Older people are a lot worse at this, and thus they tend to believe this stuff. Younger people seem to be better at spotting this stuff, and thus are less inclined. Now, this evidence is suggestive, so it's not in any way conclusive, but it is something to keep in mind, that there might be a social factor going on here. The other minor observation I wanted to make was, when you're making Melina, when you're making your argument about why we should be kind of against the comparison of scientific expertise with trying to generate expertise in conspiracy theories, I think there's something interesting about that, because I think we often also falsely conflate scientific theories and conspiracy theories as being the same class of explanatory phenomena. And of course, scientific theories are held to a really, really high, rigorous standard. Was actually the real analogy between a conspiracy theory and another type of explanation is something more like a historical explanation of an event, where we have different standards for different types of explanations. So there's something odd in the literature. You go, oh, well, conspiracy theories are bad scientific theories. Okay, so well, yeah, most social theories are bad scientific theories, but we don't say historical theories are bad because they don't adhere to the standards of science. So yeah, so those are the kind of minorish points. I was thinking about
Oh, sorry.
yeah.
Yeah, just a comment. Yeah, you're right. Like I didn't mention, but like replicability, for example, would be impossible for conspiracies, for example, or conspiracy theories.
Yeah. I mean, replicability might be possible for some types of historical or sociological hypotheses, but it's not a desiderata that makes it a good or bad theory in that particular domain. Oh, the other thing I wanted to note was the guerrilla video example is great. There's another example I'll send you a link to. It's a Transport for London video of a detective solving a crime. And over the course of 1 minute, they make 50 changes in the scene. And you can tell students you're about to see a scene that changes radically, count the number. And even then, when they know about change blindness, they still can't pick up every single thing that has occurred. It's very well done. All right, so the more substantive point. So I think Levy could bite the bullet with respect to being trapped in an echo chamber. And I think he can bite the bullet by saying, well, look, there are two types of disagreement: reasonable disagreement and unreasonable disagreement. When you have unreasonable disagreement, you get a kind of siloing, which is bad for socially constituted knowledge. And I think Levy sees conspiracy theorists as being essentially unreasonable in presenting their alternative views. And I think he would bite the bullet by saying, well, look, within the echo chamber of people who are reasonable, there's still quite a lot of reasonable disagreement in that chamber. You still have reasonable disagreement on cosmological theories. You still have reasonable disagreement when it comes to political polarization, political beliefs, and the like. So there's enough intellectual diversity in the echo chamber that you're not damaging the socially constituted nature of knowledge there. What you're doing is simply excluding people who aren't playing the game of gaining, maintaining, and spreading social knowledge. So I think he would actually be willing to bite the bullet on this. Go, yeah, sure. Actually, this does trap people in an echo chamber. We could be more social, but the cost of being more social is allowing the unreasonable disagreeers in. And we don't want the unreasonable disagreeers in. So we simply limit our socially constituted knowledge to the people who are largely playing by the same rules as we are.
Yeah, I just missed the last bit, but I think I got your point. But I don't think I agree because I mean I've read the paper a million times, and his whole argument is that if you're really respectable, I think he would say yes, this disagreement would happen within the epistemic authority community, right? But if you have any, you should just not rational if you believe an alternative to it, right? You're just automatically cut off because you're not an expert, should not be questioned. And like I mentioned as well, he says it proudly that he didn't even bother checking if what scientists are saying about change blindness is correct or not, because he just takes their word for it, because he can't even pretend to understand what it is. And people in this epistemic environment shouldn't pretend that they can know anything that the experts talk about, right? So the experts, the epistemic authorities, they're in this little tower, and the rest of us don't know, or we should totally not step outside. And I think he even says it's even worse for other scientists, like within the scientific community, but between different fields. So I'm not sure if he would do that. Then I mean, he should write a new paper and clarify that, because it's not at all clear from. I don't read him that way at all. I don't think he would bite. There's nothing to really bite there, because that is his argument. Or maybe I understood what you were trying to say, but I really think that he can't bite the bullet on that, because that's his whole argument, that people outside of the epistemic environment should not question them. And that is precisely an echo chamber of this bad kind, right? Not just an echo chamber where you can agree with some views and disagree mildly with others. No, you can't disagree. Like, you shouldn't disagree, because then you're automatically an outsider. And that is the problem with echo chambers. And that's precisely what he's prescribing for us to do in regards to conspiracy theories. So.
Okay, I've got a follow-up for this, but we'll let Nikolai ask his question, and if we have time at the end, I'll follow up with what I also take to be the objection to what I've just put forward anyway. So, Nikolai, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's okay. So, yeah, thank you very much, Melina, for your wonderful talk. And I've got some questions. So I'm the novice in the topic you presented, so not quite relevant to what you anyway. I think that why the you hinted in the epistemic, and especially I think that this I think that the most crucial this dilemma knowledge and authority, quite constant concept we can grasp. And on the other hand, and also we could say that this concept of knowledge, these Gettiers cases and so on, and so we don't have this. So I mean that this concept of knowledge is always underdetermined, and as well as probably epistemic authority as well. So what do you think? Could you provide any concrete definition, any clear definition of these two concepts? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question, Nick. So let's start with the last one first, like knowledge. You're right, but when I'm talking about it, or how I'm considering it most of the time, or at least in this talk, is just something more closer to the right, so true beliefs. And then we can have a big discussion if we can have those or not. But what most of us understand as something, I don't know if you want to use a correspondence theory or like coherence theory or something, but I think I operate more naturally on a correspondence theory of knowledge. So if it's I think it's more true if it actually corresponds to the real world, or like what the world is really like. So that's how I think about it when I talk about knowledge. In this way, and then what we want when I say that we want good epistemic environments is just this, more true beliefs in that network or in that community. And then your second was that, yeah. So your second was just the definition or understanding of an epistemic authority, right? Is that was yeah. Did you want what, like how Lay is defining it, that was unclear, what I meant in the dilemma, just so I understand your question?
Yeah, probably. I made a screenshot of your slide. So, and this epistemic difference dilemma. So on one side we have the imperative to trust experts. So I mean that this scientific aspect of the problem when we have so-called demarcation problem. It's pseudoscience. I'm sure that you have heard about it. So, and this who are experts? I mean that even in science we don't have any agreement concerning such questions, such fundamental. First of all, of course, we have some agreements, but when we meet two experts in quantum mechanics, for instance, yeah, so we have this disagreement. I mean that this very concept of expertise of expert is quite unclear for me. Maybe uh, concept, yeah.
Okay, yeah, you're right. The question of expertise is a big debate in philosophy. Like even just do we talk about experts that are able to communicate their expertise, or is it enough that you just know a lot of things and you can, move out to the woods and just have your knowledge for yourself? Are you really expert then, or do people have to identify you as such? So there's a huge philosophical debate, and it's very interesting, and I love that topic. But I think this dilemma, what I'm talking about here, what I'm focusing on, is what Levy is talking about when he talks about epistemic authority. And you're right. I think that's why his account is, for many reasons, problematic as well, because often there's no such consensus, and like I said, we even have such epistemic authorities on conspiracy theories, but if I'm really charitable to him, or like if I try to understand what he's trying to say, is that the ones that are participating in this community of experts, of where they are participating and they're debating and doing the whole thing that we think are important values for scientists to have, and the ones that are participating in that, they are the ones that are the epistemic authorities on a subject. And there's supposed to be disagreement within those communities, because I think that he agrees that makes knowledge more likely, and like, yeah, that's part of science production. It's just that he doesn't think that people outside of that, who are not participating in this group, can really do so, because I mean, intuitively, even, if I have a discussion with a biologist or something, if I just pretend, or like I have a friend, he's a physicist, right? And he publishes paper on time travel, like going backwards, that we can actually go back in time. And he tries to explain it to me, but I just can't get it. I don't understand how we're able to go back mathematically in time. It doesn't make sense for me. But anyway, he actually does experiments on this, and he's really trying to show me his lab and everything. But still, I don't have the education. I'm not situated in his social community where expertise necessary to be able to understand it, I think. So in that sense, yeah, it would be very weird for me to just say, no, I don't think that, when I don't have this background. And I think that's the kind of epistemic authority that Levy is talking about.
Yeah, you mean that any knowledge and scientific knowledge is a kind of institutionally organized, and we have these different universities, academic institutions, or some background, scientific background, and so on. Yeah,
I don't think it.
Background, yeah.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I don't think. I mean, I don't think because they're institutions that's necessarily the criteria. I think they are institutions for many of the of our communities or in our societies, because they follow these practices. So, and that's why they have also gained a lot of trust, for example, and we have produced a lot of knowledge, I think, within those institutions. But that's because they follow this formula, and also where the formula is being negotiated constantly. It's under negotiation always, and I think that is a good thing. So.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Anyway, as you probably know, logic, there is such an error, yeah, or this appeal to authority. Yeah, I mean that in logic, it's usually considered as a kind of error or fallacy, yeah, a kind of informal fallacy. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, thank you very much. Yeah.
No, but I agree with that, and I like that you mentioned that, because I actually start one of my papers where I talk about experts exactly on this topic. That it's really funny because usually in logic we do consider that being a fallacy, appealing to authority, but but we can quantify that and maybe discuss what we really mean by appealing to authority in that way. Yeah. Thank you very much, Nick.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I'll go back to the point I threatened to make. Threatened seems to be the wrong word here. So I think one of the things which is kind of interesting about Neil's view on conspiracy theories is it has has changed over time. So I'm thinking here of his paper, Conspiracy Theories as Serious Play, which comes out in 2022. It's a reply to C.T. Nguyen's Seductions of Clarity paper on the notion of epistemic traps and how clarity puts you into an echo chamber. T takes it that conspiracy theories are a good example of getting stuck in echo chambers. It's a slightly nuanced view in that T does admit some conspiracy theories are true, but he takes it that most are false, and thus belief in them traps you in these chambers. And so what's interesting about Levy's reply is that Levy just says conspiracy theorists don't believe their theories. They're engaged in game playing. So they're playing a serious game, such a serious game that in many cases they don't know they don't believe their conspiracy theories. So they get trapped in echo chambers because they're not in the process of agreement with other people. They're just playing games. So I think it might be interesting to look at Levy's later articulations of his view on conspiracy theories, because he's kind of, there's still the contra authority thing going on there with the way he defined what counts as a conspiracy theory. But what he defines as the attitude of conspiracy theorists to their conspiracy theories isn't belief. It's game playing. And in many cases, game playing such that people think they believe the conspiracy theories they claim to believe, but they actually don't. Now, I think there are numerous problems with Neil's presentation of this, which is in part Neil just takes it that it's preposterous that people believe particular conspiracy theories, and this turns out to be a subjective rather than objective standard. What Neil takes to be preposterous isn't necessarily what other people take to be preposterous. He also, by and large, doesn't seem curious about the source of conspiracy theories or what these conspiracy theories look like. So there are a whole bunch of kind of ancillary issues there, but it might be a more recent version of Neil's articulation of his thesis to kind of look at to see whether something's changed in Neil's presentation of the contra authority conspiracy theory stuff.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'll take a look at that. Yeah, I realized that the paper is from 2007, so it's a while back, and he might have changed his view. But just on a quick point on this idea of gameplay, I mean, it's not, I don't think it's so far-fetched to imagine that I mean, all of us do it in social practice, right? Like, I believe probably a lot of things that I just believe because I'm in the social group that believes that, and I don't really know if I believe it or not. I'm just accepting it because everybody around me thinks that. Like, I don't know, anything from if a movie was good or not. You know, did I really think that the movie was good, or do I just think that it was good? Everybody in my group said it was a good movie? Stuff like that. I think that's probably very common. Not just for conspiracy theorists.
Oh, maybe... yeah, no, it's a common part of, I mean, there's the political phrase, and it's one of these things where you leave Australasia and you don't know whether other people use these terms. But in New Zealand political discourse, you talk about swallowing a dead rat. Sometimes, as a politician, you have to swallow a dead rat, support a party policy that you personally don't support, but as you're a National Party member, you have to, and we had an example in New Zealand today where a minister had to defend a policy that was passed without his knowledge by going, "Oh, that's part of the coalition agreement. Of course, I accept the coalition agreement. Do you agree with the policy, Minister?" Well, I'm just saying it's part of the coalition agreement that we have to pass such policies. So he swallowed a dead rat, and that does happen a lot. But swallowing dead rats is something you do knowingly, as opposed to what Neil's putting forward here, which is that many conspiracy theorists don't know that they don't believe the conspiracy theories they purport to believe, even in their own speech acts.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have a look at the paper. I just don't get the importance of that not knowing. I mean, sorry, part that they do know, but they don't know. Like
I'm just saying that for his most recent articulation of the contra-official theory account, this is the kind of thing which is going on there now. Yeah. So it's more of a, yeah.
Thank you. It was
Okay, we are.
2022 paper.
Oh, yep.
His 2022 paper, right? Did you
Yeah,
say?
yeah.
Was-
Conspiracy Theories is Serious Play, as published in,
Oh,
I'm
yeah,
looking at
that
it right
one.
now,
Yes.
philosophical topics. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, so we are almost out of time. Is there a last question anyone wants to ask?
May I ask a question?
You may, Mark. Because I realized you turned your camera on, which is the kind of thing which is
I-
suggestive of someone who wants to say something.
Great. So I was part of a different conversation earlier. I think that it might be useful to compare what's going on right now in politics to kayfabe in um, in wrestling. So you might be familiar with like Hulk Hogan and various other professional wrestlers who didn't actually participate in the sport, but they were part of some kind of pageantry, and uh, been described as kayfabe. Um, Donald Trump was part of kayfabe. In fact, that was one of the ways that he made his reputation. And a lot of people since have referred to his participation as a way of making a name for themselves or their affiliates. Um, so what I would like to suggest is that in some cases, people do not give a shit about what they're talking about. And I realize Melina has talked about this in her paper, um, but I think it's a bigger problem than maybe she has addressed, which is that in political discourse, uh, it's possible to just make things up and pretend that they might be true. The word I've encountered most frequently in my natural language processing approach to this is that it's emblematic of how people feel, which is I don't know how that relates to things like being true or accurate or reliable or responsive evidence. Um, so I think that we would we would benefit from some kind of uh, um, understanding of this.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, I think you're right. It's an interesting comparison with these with the wrestling mania, or whatever they call. It's and the whole phenomena that happened there and why Trump jumped on that bandwagon. But maybe I can turn this as a question into a question to you, because I know, I mean, the paper is from your book, the paper that I've talked about in my talk from Moreau and Olsen, you know, where they talk about ranters and that even allowing ranters in the environment, the cost it still outweighs, you know, cutting them off or like somehow censoring these ranters. And I think they describe in one scenario at least these ranters as deliberate, like precisely as you've described this problem, right? How people don't give a shit, right? They just They might not even have to believe what they're thinking. They just keep ranting of their view. So do you not agree with that perspective? That's, you know, because there's other costs as well, right? Like how much it would cost for an epistemic community to keep censoring these and to try to educate everyone on why we're them. Like there's so many factors that go into that part. So does that outweigh just allowing for these ranters, even though it's a problem, but we will establish trust patterns, those of us who are honest and engaged in a legitimate way?
That's a very, very interesting question. I just finished reading Naomi Oreskes' book, The Big Myth. And her view seems to be that you have to tamp down the ranters to some extent because they can pay for being heard. So my view right now is that we need to hear less from them, even if we still hear from them.
Okay, so somehow allowing for it, but just not maybe allowing as much space. Is that kind of something like that?
Yeah.
Who was the paper by, did you say?
Naomi Oreskes, she wrote The Merchants of Doubt, which I'm pretty sure you're familiar with. Her most recent book came out this year. It's called The Big Myth.
Okay, I'll look into it. Thank you, Mark. Okay. Yeah, I guess I fall back in my accounts on this idea that or what I think that Moreau and Olsen showed, that ranters, even allowing for them, would still be better than excluding them or censoring them somehow. But yeah, I appreciate the criticism. Thank you.
If I may say one more thing, we found that in some simulations that misinformants and disinformants, they were just the top 10 individuals in a social network of 1,000 people. They had as much influence as 75% of the members of that community. So it seems like, you know, these very centralized nodes in a network are extremely important, and they can do a lot of harm.
Okay. Yeah, I would like to look at those. But so, okay, so in a way you're saying like advertising works, basically. Louder advertising works, is that?
Yeah, unfortunately.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Yeah, I guess like right now my thinking is with these just I don't think, and there is, I mean, of course, like you said, you also have done some studies on these I think Em said also that younger users, for example, of social media, are better at spotting chatbots, for example. I think we do learn eventually. Maybe you can trick us the first time, but yeah, I don't know. I think there's views to support both of these accounts of how misinformation spreads and influences communities. So which right, I don't know. But yeah.
Sorry, my connection seems to be bad.
Yeah. Oh, hang on, Mark, you froze it, I think.
I think you just said my connection appears to be bad. which was the last thing he said before he froze. When he could be like me when my connection is bad, completely aware of what's going on the call, just unable to interact, which is always very frustrating. But we are kind of out of time. I did actually want to, on the whole kayfabe thing, just because we have had a conspiracy theory talk. There's actually a major conspiracy theory in the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, which then became the WWE, in that there was a scandal around Bret the Hitman Hart losing his belt at a tournament in Canada. And people have suggested that there were deals made such that Bret the Hitman Hart was kind of conspired against by Vince McMahon and the person that he was fighting against. And the problem with kayfabe is that kayfabe is so absolute that people do not break kayfabe at any point in their career, including retirement after being an active wrestler. So you cannot trust anyone from Bret Hitman Hart to Vince McMahon to tell you the honest truth about what really went down, because they are maintaining kayfabe in such a way that we know something happened. But there's really, unless some written documents ever appear, we will never get confirmation from the people involved. So kayfabe is a fascinating phenomena, and frankly, someone needs to do the philosophy of kayfabe at some point.
Oh. Maybe Mark. No.
I'm sure Mark is busy enough with his own projects not to add an additional one on. I'm thinking this is a kind of PhD project for someone who might be thinking. Melina, thank you very much for a great presentation. Lucian had to leave because he had to go for another meeting. I'll just briefly mention that our next seminar in the series is on the 26th of November. Jeremy Wyatt from the University of Waikato will be giving a talk called The Slide into Nihilism, a Problem for the Concordance Account of Moral Truth. So there'll be a presentation in 13 days by someone from Aotearoa talking about moral truth and the work, let's say, of David Lynch, the work of Michael Lynch, although maybe Jeremy will mention David Lynch as well. Everybody should try and mention David Lynch at some point in their presentations. That will be in 13 days' time. You'll see the advertising wherever you saw the advertising for this talk, whether it be on a WeChat group, on a philosophy list, or by an email list you have happened to have joined. Otherwise, once again, let's say thank you to Melina for a great presentation.
Thank you so much.
And I will hopefully see some of you, if not a lot of you, very soon. Good night.